What's up, wrestling fans? It is time for another edition of The Voice of Wrestling right here on voiceofwrestling.net and, of course, Fight TV. I'm your host, Chris Cash, alongside Nick Paglino, and I'd like to start tonight's show off with a confession. Nick told me earlier, please, Chris, do not start the show this way. Don't let the fans in on our secrets of broadcast. But I felt it was required.
Okay.
Normally, when we kick off this show, and we've talked about it in the past, we always start with, we've got a lot to talk about. That is a falsehood. Generally, we don't really have that much to talk about, and Nick and I just find a way to wing it for an hour or an hour and 15 minutes with guests and one or two topics that will stretch on for way longer than they probably should go. But I am pleased. No, I'm ecstatic. Because this is the first week probably in months that I can actually say we have so much to cover in so little time. And so, Nick, let's not waste it, because after the Money in the Bank pay-per-view and after Raw this week, we are obviously taping before SmackDown. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, Nick, but this is, without a question, the first week in a while where I can say we might not have the time to cover the stuff we want to get to today.
You're probably very right. So, instead of, and I'm so glad that you've shared this big broadcasting secret.
I know, it's going to be all over the place.
As if this applies to every show out there in the world, and not just us two idiots who have no idea what we're doing.
Right.
And we should be able to know how to fill up an hour of time without having to resort to much more intelligent guests that we bring on the show to do the talking for us. So maybe since this week we don't have any intelligent guests on, and we have so much to actually talk about, maybe we just say nothing at all.
Right.
And roll the credits.
It's not a bad idea.
Do we have credits?
Kinda. Maybe. I mean, not really.
Can we roll something? Can we roll the credits to like Three's Company or like some old television show just to make it look like there's a professional staff that works on the show?
That's very true. Rather, though, what we will do is we'll roll the opening image to our main event, the top story of the week, and it's a big one. It's a doozy, and I'm looking forward to it. It's the main event right here on The Voice of Wrestling. Ronda Rousey has to be our main event this week, Nick, because I think most people, and not surprisingly, you and I both have discussed that Ronda was kind of the wild card in a lot of ways. We didn't know how she was going to be in a singles match going into Money in the Bank. We knew she looked amazing in that first, but could it have been beginner's luck with Kurt Angle there, and of course Triple H and Stephanie opposite the ring? Could it have been beginner's luck? Could it have just been really great veterans in the ring leading the way? Obviously she looked great, but coming out of that pay-per-view and then immediately going into a high-profile match with Nia Jax, a championship match, we had a lot of concerns, and I think rightfully so. But Nick, I think the main event this week, the top story, at least in my mind, is there is no room any longer to criticize or be concerned or question or be worried about Ronda Rousey going forward. She is on her way, Nick, to being one of, if not the biggest star in the business today, in my mind. And I think this weekend into Raw just cemented the fact that you have no reason for concern any longer as it relates to how she's going to do in the ring in singles matches, in high-profile promos or settings. I think her mic work could still use a little work. I think her acting skills might be something that needs to develop over time. But when she's in the middle of that ring, Nick, working with somebody that a lot of people question whether she could lead the match in Nia Jax, she proved. Both of them did a great job, so I don't want to discredit Nia either. But Ronda Rousey proved that she can hang in with step for step, basically, with someone like Nia Jax. Put her in the ring with somebody a little more seasoned, and I would imagine it would even be that much better. But this weekend, including Monday's Raw, Nick, really, really proved to me that Ronda, no reason to concern, and she's more than on her way to becoming a bona fide, legit superstar, men included, across the board, across the entire roster. She is money and is going to be for some time now.
And I'll tell you what, I'll go a step further and say what I saw on Sunday night, and you couple it with what we saw on Raw this week, she may already be at that level.
Good point, yeah.
You know, like you said, the concerns were different and justifiable clearly going into WrestleMania 34 because this was her first match. But I think we all felt, at the very least, her being surrounded by Hall of Famer Kurt Angle, future Hall of Famer Triple H. You know, the prediction there was it was going to be Kurt Angle versus Triple H with a sort of peppering of Ronda Rousey. No one really expected her to command the ring the way she did. Going into this match at Money in the Bank, you stripped away some of those safety nets, and now it's just her in the ring with you know, someone who, again, I would agree we maybe had doubts with in terms of Nia Jax. She was still getting very comfortable as that main eventer in the women's division. What were these two going to do together? And you know, it was the best way to put it is there are times in pro wrestling, and this is when I think it's the most fun to be a pro wrestling fan, is when you can be watching a match, and my God, how long have we been watching wrestling? Years and years and years. Right. You know, most of my life I've been watching wrestling, and every week, or you know, and it's very funny. Sometimes I sit there and I watch with maybe my wife or with my friends who don't really watch it, and you know, my wife in particular, you know, she'll sit there, and when it gets a little too quote unquote violent, you know, she'll say, "Oh, I can't watch this. I got to walk away." You know, and she told me last night she hates the arm bar. She said, "Oh my God, it's just such a violent looking move. I mean, she's breaking the arm." And here I am sitting here saying, you know, they're selling, you know, It's not real, you know, it's fine. They're fine. Don't worry about it. It's, you know, the punch is not that hard. You know, these guys are fine, even though it may look good. You know, the fact that it's convincing her or someone, or, you know, someone who doesn't watch it very much is a big kudos to them. They're doing their jobs. But every once in a while, even a fan like myself will say, wait a minute, when I'm watching something. And that happened to me on Sunday watching Money in the Bank. You know, there was a moment in that match, I believe it was when Nia Jax, I can't remember the exact move, but I think she threw Rousey, and then Rousey landed on the mat, and then she fell through the ring ropes onto the outside. And I said to myself, you know, I don't want to fall for this, but she might legitimately be hurt. You know, and the way she was selling and the way Nia Jax was because like you said, I don't want to take anything away from Nia either. She was excellent. The way she was laying it into Rousey, there were brief moments there where I really felt like maybe Rousey was, you know, I wasn't saying like she's going to have to go to the hospital or anything, but thinking to myself, man, she may be slightly beat up right now. And that's how good of a job she did at selling that offense. That even someone like me, who's been watching this so long, was questioning slightly, what was I seeing? And then to see the fight back, and then to see the judo throw, and to just see the way everything went down, you know, between the two of them, not to mention, and then Chris, of course, we'll talk a little bit about this, Alexa Bliss coming in.
Yeah.
She really just established herself in that ring as a superstar. She looks like a superstar. She carries herself like a superstar. And if that didn't sell it for you on Sunday, then what happened on Raw really should have.
Well, and I think, Nick, you know, my personal thoughts on the match itself, one thing that kept popping into my head, and I was in the beginning, I was almost afraid that she was going to start overselling, but she never really did. It was just Dolph Ziggler-like selling. It was so good and believable I remember, and I think it was what I remember was when she got slammed into the guardrail, the matted guardrail on the outside.
When she swung her around
and slammed her into that. What I thought was amazing, though, that I saw, Nick, was when she got rolled back into the ring, or she rolled back into the ring, and she was still kind of holding her back. She was holding her back and selling that spot minutes later. And I'm thinking, that's what a pro does to remember. And we'll talk later on about like Seth Rollins and stuff and Dolph Ziggler's match and everything that happened there and the title change. But I remember, after Raw now, I can think back and I'm thinking, the announcers made a point to put over that Dolph Ziggler was watching the match with Elias the night before, and he's going back and attacking the leg. And that made me think about Ronda Rousey selling that back injury the night before. And I'm thinking, that's what people like Dolph and Seth Rollins do. No selling is something that most celebrity athletes that will come into WWE, that's one of the hardest things for them to learn. And Ronda did it like a natural
in her second
pro.
Match. Years and years after John Cena had been wrestling at a main event level in WWE, that was always my biggest criticism.
Right, yeah.
Is that, somebody hits him with a finisher, and 10 seconds later, he's just, it's like it never happened. And again, and I don't want to digress too far into, maybe he was instructed not to sell it. Sure. He was someone who I always complained about not selling the lingering effects of something that happened. And that, to your point, Chris, is something that actually, that was what was making me think to myself, is she just getting this so quickly, or is she hurt? The back. What I did notice was when she got up, because that move was devastating looking. When she got up, normally when they get thrown back in the ring, that's usually a very good tell, because you can see the wrestler actually jump themselves into the ring and roll in when they're thrown back in. And I thought, all right, this will be a good sign as to how she's doing. But you're right. I remember that. She kind of jumped in and was favoring that back. And I'm thinking, that maybe that really took the piss out of her, There was just so much detail being paid attention to in terms of selling that offense. And my God, she had to sell. It's not like she only had to sell 3 offensive maneuvers from Nia. She was selling through that entire match. And she did a really, really extremely professional job of it. And Chris, to sort of segue here, let me ask you, because there's been a lot of opinion out there in both ways. Some people agreeing with it, some people vehemently disagreeing with it. This idea of Ronda Rousey selling so much for Nia Jax. She's the UFC legend, future Hall of Famer, the baddest woman on the planet, toughest woman on the planet. She's laying into Triple H at WrestleMania 34. Do you agree with this criticism, some of the criticism out there, that she should not have been selling so much for someone like Nia Jax in that match?
No, I think the opposite. I think obviously Nia Jax is somebody that WWE has been high on. They need to continue being high on. She's a good worker. She's a good character with the right tweaks, I believe. I think she's got a lot of promise. And in the end, look, to me, it's less believable for someone the size of Nia Jax to just be manhandled in a wrestling setting by Ronda Rousey, despite the fact that Ronda Rousey's Ronda Rousey. I feel like they have to start finding a way. And these are the problems that the same people criticizing that aspect of it are probably the ones that hate Roman Reigns and John Cena for their Superman tactics and the stuff you just mentioned about Cena. Like, they're the same people that will bitch about that, but then they think because they like her in the same way that maybe they like and respect a Brock Lesnar opposite someone like Roman Reigns or whatever. He's believable. He's a legit badass. They'll criticize this with Ronda, but they'll think John Cena and Roman Reigns don't need to have that type of tactics being used for them as well, where it's kind of no selling. They don't need to sell that much. They don't need to be on the offense. Basically, that's kind of which maybe there's a little difference for someone like a John Cena and a Roman Reigns. It's typically they'll get beat 75% of the match and then they hulk up, which is kind of what you saw with Ronda last night. It was very similar. She did a ton of selling most of that match, and then obviously comes back. The crowd got into her comeback as well, and I felt like the story was what they tell 99% of the time in a setting like that. That's the type of story they will tell. People just pick and choose when they decide they like it or not, depending on who it is that's doing the hulking up and the coming back. But I think Ronda Rousey selling for Nia Jax made a ton of sense. And I think that overall, because the good thing, which we're going to get into as well, is the follow-up on Raw brought Ronda back to life. It doesn't matter what happened in that match. She put over Nia in a big way, but then the next night she takes out the entire crew that's in front of her. She takes out Kurt, takes out Alexa, takes out two refs, and the others scare off. I mean, they did their job to make her look like she's supposed to look the next night on Raw, but she did her job putting over Nia Jax, which I think is deserved on Nia's part. I think it's awesome on Ronda's part, and I think they did it phenomenal. I think it was a great story, and again, I cannot harp on how good at selling Ronda was. It was mind-blowing to me, which is why I felt we had to kick off the show by saying,
yeah, no
concerns anymore with her.
100%, and look, we talked about this before too. It's tough to book someone like a Ronda Rousey.
Absolutely.
Because you've got the people that are going to suggest, well, she's got to come in and she's got to destroy. But look, if she was going to be working a schedule like a Brock Lesnar, then okay. If she was going to be a special attraction, then okay. I can understand having her come in. She destroys everybody. She really doesn't sell that much because she's being used in this specific role. But if she is going to be a full-time WWE star, then we have to throw out the window this notion of her being a legit fighter and her being, the baddest woman on the planet. We have to forget about the fact that we know that in real life, yes, she could probably shoot, fight, and beat most of the men on the roster. She probably could beat AJ Styles, Seth Rollins, your champions. She could probably beat them in real fights. But we're not in UFC, and this isn't real fighting. And WWE has to protect its company and has to protect its stars. So they now have to start embracing Ronda Rousey as one of them. You can still highlight her abilities and her strengths, and they've done a great job of that. So far, we've seen her lay into Triple H and Kurt Angle, on television. So we see that strength. We see what she's capable of. We saw it in the match against Nia Jax with that incredible throw and her ability to fight back. But you have to protect big stars, or at least people that they're building up to be big stars, in the Alexa Blisses and the Nia Jaxes and whoever else she's going to work with as far as the women are concerned in WWE. Otherwise, you're doing no favors to the women's division.
100%.
You have her come in, she destroys everybody in the women's division, and then what? Then you got to fire all the women and bring in new ones because no one can compete with Rousey. It doesn't make sense. So this was so well done in terms of protecting her, making her, emphasizing her strengths, making her look great, even in the face of defeat. And then in the process, making Nia Jax look great, making her look like a big star and a force to be reckoned with in the ring. And then making Alexa Bliss look like the smart, cunning, cowardly heel that she is.
Well,
so I feel like all three women in the course of the two nights, on Sunday night with Money in the Bank and on Raw this week, all three women came out looking great.
And speaking of, before we move into the rest of the Money in the Bank, once we get out of the main event, we do need to follow up and talk about Alexa Bliss cashing in. She won Money in the Bank earlier. And then she cashes in that night, which, Nick, you and I both called, I think, Alexa Bliss winning that match. We both kind of thought maybe she would end up being, right? Didn't you had her pick too, right?
You're talking about for the Money in the ladder match.
Yeah.
I did have Alexa Bliss.
Yeah, I think we both did. And I don't think anybody, I mean, it's a huge surprise for her to come out, cash in the same night. But we both kind of expected a screwy finish. You called it as well, where, hey, she gets the win. Ronda gets the win in the match, but then obviously she doesn't win the title, which makes a lot of sense as well. And, you know, we'll talk about like Carmella. I made a comparison last week about Carmella on the SmackDown side being kind of the Alexa Bliss equivalent. Alexa, I am so happy that it went down the way that it did. I didn't call it. I didn't necessarily expect it, but I'm glad that it did because I think Alexa Bliss needed to be back in this triangle somewhere. And I think if anybody, and you could tell they were slow rolling the idea, Nick, of having Nia Jax turn heel completely. They didn't really want that for some reason, and I don't necessarily blame them. I'll see how they follow up with Nia and her character, but they didn't really want her to go all the way heel. So they kind of held on to that, and now they've got Alexa Bliss in there, who, by the way, is still money on the mic. She followed up on Raw with a phenomenal promo, worked so well with Ronda, and just made it where like you wanted to see her get her ass kicked. And of course, she is the type that can control a crowd as well. As soon as they're chanting, "You deserve it," she turned it right back around on the crowd this week on Raw, talking basically, "I just wanted to rub it all in your faces." It was great because then it still puts the focus on her as a heel, Ronda, and even Nia, who's now going to follow up with her rematch clause on the next pay-per-view. It makes a lot of sense because we thought Nia and Alexa still had some work to be done, and now Ronda, with Ronda being suspended for 30 days, Nick, it makes sense that the spotlight can be on Nia and Alexa. And Alexa can be built up even stronger. Nia is going to get a little bit out of this, but she's going to be kind of fading into the background now as Alexa gets back into the spotlight. And obviously Ronda returns here in a month and they decide to go that direction. Nick, I guess my question to you would be, were you surprised with the result that we got coming, as far as Money in the Bank goes, Alexa cashing in that night? Are you surprised with that outcome? And then, of course, following up on Monday with the suspension and stuff, which I thought it was great. And I can kind of understand their reasoning behind it. But now we have Alexa versus Nia Jax for a follow-up championship match. Ronda suspended. Just talk about Alexa Bliss's place in all of this and your thoughts on how they handled putting her back on top.
Yeah, well, certainly I was surprised by it when I saw it, but again, like you mentioned, we had been talking about this and we figured some kind of screwball finish was going to happen. I think we had suggested perhaps Natalya would come out, upset that she didn't win Money in the Bank, turn on Ronda Rousey. Maybe it would have been Stephanie McMahon. There were several red herrings there. Which, of course, we now know were clearly red herrings because the idea here was for Alexa Bliss to sort of regain the title. But in hindsight, as surprising as it was when I saw it, in hindsight, it makes total sense because what it did there was, if they had gone in the direction of having Natalya come out, then what we have is Ronda Rousey versus Natalya. That's a sort of sub-main event feud where then, Nia Jax, maybe she retains the title. Maybe she's feuding with Alexa Bliss. And I think after we've seen what Nia Jax, what Ronda Rousey has established herself as on Sunday and on Monday, she needs to be in the main event picture. She is the star of the women's division. And that's no longer because of who she was in UFC. In just 2 in-ring appearances in WWE, she's already established herself as the star in WWE as well.
Yep.
So she needs to be in that conversation. And remember, when she left when she agreed to the suspension, she said, okay, I will, I think she said it on social media too. She said, okay, I will agree to the suspension. I'll serve my 30 days, but I'm putting Alexa Bliss on notice. When I come back, I'm going to kick her pink-haired ass or something like that. So we know where Ronda Rousey's going to be when she comes back. Mm-hmm. She's returning to the main event picture, which is where she needs to be. Does she need to be holding the title right now? Not necessarily. But the fact that these deals that are coming up, these big money deals with Fox and NBC Universal to bring SmackDown over, to keep Raw on Monday nights on USA Network, Ronda Rousey is going to be someone that is very key for these deals.
Sure.
And she needs to be what the women's division is based around, even if she's not holding the title. So to skyrocket her into, we now know in hindsight, based on what we saw on Sunday and Monday, that it was the correct idea to put her into that title shot, that title opportunity in only her second match and in her first singles match in WWE. We know now that was the right thing to do. And we've got to feel confident in saying that the right thing to do going forward is to keep her in that top spot. So like you said, I think it very well worked. I like the suspension idea because it gets her off television for a little while so that Nia and Alexa can continue doing their thing. And maybe in the process, they'll even build up another contender. Maybe we'll see another woman. I was unbelievably impressed with Ember Moon in that Money in the Bank match.
Yeah, she looked great.
Impressed with her even before that. So this could maybe give an opportunity for someone like Ember Moon to emerge as a potential contender while we wait for Ronda Rousey to come back.
No, I agree with you, and I think I'm curious to see how they do follow up and how they use this time with Ronda away. I think right now the best thing they can do, and it looks like they're going in this direction, Nick, is like you mentioned, Ronda does not need the titles, and you've got to stretch out her. Her dominance, and you've got to stretch out her superstardom as long as you can. Most people are expecting WrestleMania 35 next year, I would imagine, still to be Charlotte versus Ronda. I wouldn't be surprised if that was maybe some sort of kind of title versus title type of match. I think Ronda could be your champion, but my biggest concern too, or biggest question mark at this point, as this whole main event has been about not to be concerned with Ronda. But I think my only concern, if there is one, is not how Ronda will do, but more how they'll utilize her and not put the title on her too quickly. If she comes back and starts immediately working with Alexa Bliss, she either has to take some pretty quick losses, early on in her career, or she's going to win the title, which I don't think needs to happen right now. I think you've got a lot of time before that needs to happen, because I think what happens once she gets the title, Nick, it's going to be very difficult to take the title off of her. But how do you fill that space in between now and then? Does Alexa Bliss, in your mind, Nick, before we start wrapping this up and moving on, does Alexa Bliss give Ronda Rousey her first official loss?
She could, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know if that would be such a terrible idea. But what I really liked on Monday night, because I think we can't glance over this too, and this goes toward the Roman Reigns problem that we have been discussing for so long on this show, which is how refreshing was it to see, because even in what we've been seeing with Ronda Rousey, and I actually remember Michael Cole mentioning this when Rousey made her entrance at Money in the Bank. She was coming down the ramp, and she was doing what you can tell is she's being told to do by the producers or by Vince or by Kevin Dunn, by somebody, which is something that Finn Balor does ad nauseum, and people are pointing it out, and it's growing very stale. It's the smile. It's the babyface smile.
Yeah.
She comes down, and and she's smiling at everybody and the waving and the hitting everybody's hands. It's like telling everybody, I'm the good guy. I'm the baby face. I'm a fair player. I'm best friends with Natalya. All of their baby faces are so damn wholesome. You know, Bayley's a hugger. Finn Balor's got the big smile, and and Roman, and these guys are the baby faces in the company. You know, John Cena's got the hustle, loyalty, and respect. They're so very wholesome and so very PG and so very friendly and over the top. They're like, Clark Kent, or Superman, these sort of over the top friendly neighborhood superheroes that I think are getting very vanilla in WWE. Wasn't it great to see Ronda Rousey get evil on Monday night?
Absolutely.
And just lay everybody out? I like this idea of that kind of a Ronda Rousey. That's the kind of Ronda Rousey I want to see. In fact, I would totally not be disappointed if Ronda Rousey came back and on the first night back, she got suspended again. Because she just goes absolutely nuts and tears everybody apart. That crowd went nuts Monday night when she flipped Kurt Angle and she was taking everybody out. That's what people want to see.
No doubt.
So I like this idea of the vigilante, and I loved when she was beating up Angle and she was yelling, you're not my friend, you're not friends with me. I love that. She doesn't have friends. Ditch this whole routine of, me and Natalya are best friends and we hang out, we get ice cream after every WWE show. Nobody wants to see that. Let's see her, allow her, you have enough of those in WWE, those baby faces. Allow her to be a badass. Allow her to come out and say, you know what? I'm going to do what I want in this company. I'm going to destroy whoever I have to destroy in order to get what I want, which is Alexa Bliss and the title that I'm owed. And I think because that's what Ronda Rousey was known for anyway, for being that badass in UFC. I'm not necessarily saying, breaking the rules and getting suspended, not that aspect of it, but the badass aspect of it, the fighter, the take no prisoners, that game face, and Michael Cole, actually, that's what I was referring to when she came down. Michael Cole said, Ronda Rousey's all smiles now, but make no mistake about it, when that bell rings, her game face comes on, and they've been building that story of, Ronda Rousey's the nice girl out of the ring, but when the bell rings, she's no games, she's got that, that look, that killer look. I would like to see that version of her out of the ring too. And we saw a taste of that on Raw Monday night. And I think that should continue.
No, I agree with you. And I think this weekend was just a monumental success as it relates to Ronda Rousey. The entire Raw women's program, Nia Jax, I'm more concerned with than anything else as far as how they're going to follow up with her. You expect her to take another loss very quickly with Alexa Bliss and their match coming up. But I think the suspension was great. The follow-up, they made Ronda Rousey look like a beast. Alexa Bliss was money as always. It's great to see her back in the picture. And I think she's going to do even a better job because there's defined roles here. There's clear cut, which there really hasn't been with Nia and Ronda. It's been a lot of weird, confusing mess as far as babyface versus heel. I think, again, Alexa's going to really separate across that line very, very well. And I think it's going to work to even help especially Ronda's character and her development in that area. I think Alexa's going to take her head and shoulders above where Nia Jax could, and I'm really looking forward to that once Ronda obviously comes back and gets back in the picture. And I won't be surprised if they find a way to maybe get Alexa out of the matches with Ronda for a while, if possible. They could set this up at SummerSlam. That might even be too soon for me. I feel like maybe they find a way to put Natalya in there first before they follow back up with Ronda and Alexa. Of course, they're going to have some interaction, but maybe the high-profile match that comes next doesn't happen that fast. But we're of course going to keep talking about that as the weeks and the months continue. So great job last night. Really, really loved it. And this has been, of course, the main event here on The Voice of Wrestling. And we're back on the Voice of Wrestling, Chris Cash, Nick Paglino, and Nick, that was just the main event. We still have so many things to get to. Money in the Bank in general. We need to kind of run down the highlights and the lowlights and tell everybody what we thought of the actual pay-per-view. And I want to kick it off with what I really think was kind of the other big topic coming out of Sunday and into Monday. As happy as I was, Nick, with the title change that they had with Alexa Bliss and her becoming the champion again to set up a great feud eventually with Ronda Rousey. The other follow-up that they had, and Dolph Ziggler, my boy, and you would think I would be blowing up about how excited I am that he won, and I am. I'm excited that Dolph got the title, but we've been here before with Dolph. And Nick, I guess my question to you, kind of coming out of Money in the Bank and how they went this route, and now as we know, we're going to have to talk about Brock and his next title defense at SummerSlam and them setting that up. Let's talk Seth Rollins and Elias. Elias loses the match on Sunday. He doesn't get the follow-up on Raw, which I actually think would have been better. I thought Elias might win on Sunday. He didn't. He loses. He has his little in-ring song segment, a full song, by the way, on Raw. And now it looks like he's going to be in this multi-man, multi-person match at the next pay-per-view to decide who gets to challenge Brock Lesnar. And I hate this, Nick. I am happy for Dolph, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But to me, even though it came out of nowhere, people ate it up because it was a big kind of surprise title change. Why not give that to someone like Elias? Elias is a guy they've at least consistently, because he's new, I guess, newer than Dolph, has consistently been put over as a pretty believable heel, a guy that they are trying to protect, even though they'll give him a loss when they feel like it'll benefit somebody else at that time. But Elias needs this. And I feel like he is on the borderline. He's on that border, Nick. He's on that, walking that thin line of becoming someone that you just don't trust is going to ever win anything big. So why take him serious on that level, which they want to continue putting him in those types of high-profile settings, Nick, but yet they don't want to give him any big wins. And I think it's a shame because I think Elias is so good naturally in his role as a heel, a true heel, or as close to a true heel as you can get these days in wrestling. He's very good at what he does, yet they don't ever want to follow up with a big win for him. And I felt like if it wasn't Sunday, why not put him in that next matchup on Raw? Let him win the title unexpectedly and give him some momentum because he hasn't had it. Yet it goes to a guy like Dolph who they tried and tried again. And I want them to utilize Dolph. I promise it is hard for me to say this. But we've been here with Dolph. We haven't with Elias. This weekend and into Monday, Nick, in my mind, really did a lot of damage to Elias if they don't follow up with something big. Because now he goes on to this multi-man match. We assume he loses. So what benefit did he get out of this? And do you agree with me that maybe he's really teetering that line of just kind of irrelevance almost at this point?
I don't necessarily know that I would say he's teetering on the line of irrelevance, because I think WWE feels like his spotlight are the performances, the songs. And those usually get over pretty well. When JoJo does the Ladies and Gentlemen Elias, he usually gets a pop despite being a heel. He was really able to draw some good heat with that song last night because I think it went so long. Not to mention he was trashing the Grand Rapids crowd. I think WWE maybe has this opinion that he doesn't need the big match wins right now because he's getting over as this song guy, in a different capacity other than in-ring wrestling. I think that's a mistake. I don't necessarily know that means he's teetering on that line of being, buried, so to speak. But
No,
I
and I
definitely
agree.
think it's not the right direction. I definitely think he would have needed that win. I mean, and I so agree with you because I was actually ready to have this argument
debate.
With you today on the show because I figured you were going to be a big fan of the decision to go with Dolph Ziggler. But for me, I'm thinking to myself, if you're not going to give it to Elias, which they didn't do on Sunday, and you don't give him the follow-up on Monday, why not Drew McIntyre? Why are you going back to the guy who we know? And again, this could just be us using history, and playing the history card, and knowing what historically they have done with Dolph Ziggler. But if you want to build that IC title up, which Seth Rollins has been doing an amazing job
Great job.
And really making it, a top title on Raw, which it has become by default because Brock Lesnar's not around.
Yep.
Why are you giving it to a guy who, historically speaking, is just going to get booked in nonsense matches and pushed down instead of giving it to a guy like a Drew McIntyre who could have really ran with that title and proved himself to be sort of the next big thing? It would have been something he could really benefit from. Or, of course, a guy like an Elias. So I really, again, yes, as much as, that title change got a big pop, and again, it was surprising, unlike the Ronda Rousey Alexa Bliss situation, after I got over the initial shock of, wow, they did a big surprise title change, I thought, this just does not seem to be like the right decision. Now, hey, we could be wrong, and this could be the time where WWE's really pulling the trigger on Dolph Ziggler, but I'm going to have to guess no. And even if they kind of do, I just think there were so many better ways they could have gone about this with somebody like an Elias, or really my pick would have been Drew McIntyre. That's a guy that really could have benefited from the IC title, really helped push that title toward the top. But, again, I don't understand the decision to go back to a fall guy like Dolph Ziggler.
I think, and I agree with you, I think, again, I'm not against Dolph Ziggler being put in a situation where he can have titles, be in high-profile matches. I'm not against that. I don't know that right now is the best time for it. I hope they prove me wrong and they do something with Dolph. He's always been an easy throwaway once he gets the title, and I don't think he's going to add a ton of credibility to that division like The Miz, like Seth Rollins, as you mentioned, have done over the past couple of years. I feel like they're going to use Dolph like they always. Now, keep in mind, they are very high right now on Dolph and Drew McIntyre. I think it's a decent pairing. They were putting it over as they were going to go more in the tag team division route. And then, of course, on Raw, you saw Drew and them in the backstage interview after the title change talking about, hey, this isn't the first, we're not done winning titles, basically, was the message. So, of course, I could see them winning the tag team titles along with the Intercontinental Championship. But I think they're going to take this run with Dolph a little more serious than they have some of them in the past. But I still, and maybe irrelevance is the wrong word for Elias, but I do think that at the end of the day, Elias needs a lot more to remain credible, which he's had and he's created on his own, because he's got one of those gimmicks that could be portrayed as too gimmicky, too cheesy to be taken serious ever. But he's far from a Heath Slater type character. He has built this into a character that is believable. He comes off still as a tough, non-coward type of heel, yet at the end of the day, he never picks up any meaningful wins, and I think they need to eventually give that to him, and I was hoping they were going to do it Sunday. And then in hindsight, I'm thinking if you were going to do that for Dolph, why couldn't you have for Elias? Because Dolph didn't need this right now with his newly formed relationship with Drew. He's getting plenty of publicity. He's getting plenty of meaningful airtime. You didn't have to do this with Dolph. But I will say that at the end of the day, Monday night's first hour, even with Dolph winning and all that stuff, reminded me of what Raw can be, what WWE can be. It was a jam-packed and there really wasn't that much. It was just it was one big segment and a match, obviously, but it was a phenomenal start to Raw. And I thought that's the type of stuff. Some of the shock and awe, the surprises, throwing things against the wall to see what sticks, keeping people on their toes, not so predictable. All of that went well. I just felt like it was with the wrong pieces. Someone like Elias could have utilized this win and this title run a lot better. Maybe he's not irrelevant, but now we know he probably goes into this next matchup where he loses and he doesn't win the opportunity to challenge, obviously, Brock Lesnar. So what happens with Elias? It is time for them to kind of put up or shut up with him. I'm not saying he's going to be irrelevant tomorrow. He's too good of a character to maybe make that happen. But he is at the point for me, Nick, where I just don't necessarily believe he's going to win anything of substance anytime soon. And I hope they eventually change that, because he's really too talented for them not to take that next step with. And maybe it's just not his time right now, but allow him to get into some feuds where he actually can come out on top for once, versus using him as kind of a fall guy to benefit other people. But yes, no, I think that it's interesting. I'm curious, Nick, to see what they do with Dolph in this position and how they keep trying to develop Drew and Dolph together. But overall, it seems like, Nick, before we move on to other highlights coming out of Money in the Bank and Raw this week, it seems like maybe Seth is obviously on to bigger things. Maybe Seth Rollins, he's been on a hot streak lately. What happens here with Seth Rollins, Nick?
Well, I would love to get into that. I would like to break some news before we do that.
Oh.
That I am reading right now on WWE.com. WWE has come to terms on the release of Big Cass.
So, wow. When we talked about the doghouse,
there are no other details being provided at the time. But, you know, there had to have been something brewing here. Because I think the way we've seen Cass booked over the past couple of weeks, especially after that incident that took place with him and that wrestler that played Little Daniel Bryan, and we knew about the backstage incident that took place there. We sort of knew there was a lot of backstage heat on Cass. He racked up the losses to Daniel Bryan, another big loss to Daniel Bryan on Sunday, and now here we are. Just shortly after the pay-per-view, and WWE is announcing that he has been released from the company.
Wow.
Which is very interesting, because, you know, we had talked a little bit before about what happened with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn.
Yeah.
And when they sort of broke script at that WWE SmackDown taping, which was last year, and they were really not punished for it, other than they were sent home from the tour.
Right.
You know, I believe maybe they missed one TV taping, and then they were back with the company. They weren't suspended, of course, not released. And now, and we can discuss this a little bit later too, we now know that Sami Zayn actually suffered an injury, which is one of the reasons why his match was so short at Money in the Bank against Bobby Lashley. But we could talk a little bit more about that later. But interesting that Zayn and Kevin Owens were not punished for breaking script. But here we are, Big Cass being released. Again, I cannot confirm that this is because of what happened with the SmackDown segment that went awry. But I think the big key takeaway here is that the difference between what happened with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, which was them not following script, and then what happened with Big Cass, is that Big Cass reportedly asked Vince McMahon if he could further the beatdown on that,
told no.
On that wrestler that played Daniel Bryan. And Vince McMahon told him no, and he went out there and he did it anyway. So is the big takeaway here, you don't cross the boss.
Well, of course.
I mean, that's kind of a Captain Obvious thing to say.
Right.
But could that have been the very big difference here between those two situations, which in the Cass case, he was actually told directly to his face by the boss, you're not to do this. And he went out there and he did it anyway.
Well, and I think, too, we don't know.
And if that's the case, why wasn't he released that night?
Well, but see, that's the thing. We don't know, Nick, exactly that's the only reason. We don't know how his attitude. We don't know how his attitude has been since then.
Certainly,
we don't know if W wanted to give him another opportunity to see how well he did after the fact. How is he going to get over as a star? They must have seen something that I at least saw, and I didn't necessarily see him being a guy that was worthy of the big push and a huge, big profiled angle with Daniel Bryan. When he returned to the ring, I felt like that was a little bit of a lackluster attempt to put Daniel Bryan back into a feud. But either way, we don't know what type of attitude that he's had. Maybe he's just been a little bit more on edge backstage. Maybe it's just a combination of things. But it's like we talked about the possibility of him being in the doghouse, Nick. It's like they said, screw the doghouse. We're throwing you out of the doghouse completely. You're not even worthy of being in the doghouse.
Right.
And I think that's telling. I mean, it is going to be interesting to hear his side of the story if and when he gets out there to tell it, and see how much of this really can be narrowed down to just that one incident. Vince tells, no, don't beat down the little person any more than what we've already sectioned off here. He goes out and does it anyway. Maybe they were biding time before they did it. But somewhere deep down, somewhere out there, Nick, Enzo Amore is like, yeah, punk. And he's probably going to rap about it.
Yeah. Maybe the fallout we can look forward to here is Enzo's new song that he'll write about.
So either way, that's interesting. Big breaking news here on the Voice of Wrestling. The other, obviously, moving on to kind of get into and I'm perfectly fine with that, to be honest. I'm Daniel Bryan won. That's good. It should have happened that way. Big Cass now moves on, and we go from there. The other big thing, though, one of the big things coming out of Money in the Bank anyway, was obviously Braun Strowman. Nick, neither one of us called it. Yeah. He's been put over so strong going into Money in the Bank. We really did not expect him to follow up with a huge win. Kevin Owens has been so good. Samoa Joe on the SmackDown side could have used this. Braun Strowman, and I'm curious now as we kind of sink in. Overall, though, Nick, what did you think of the match for Money in the Bank? Did you like it? Was it good? And then let's really dive into this with Braun Strowman and try to dissect what they might try to do going forward, because Brock Roman is an obvious thing. We know that at this point. We assume that at this point, Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns happening once again. Very likely that Roman finally actually gets the victory and wins the title. Is Braun after that? Are they just leaving it up for Braun down the road? Do we expect him to cash in anytime soon? Where does Braun fit into this picture? Because even on Raw this week, it was really a situation where, yes, he's got the Money in the Bank, but that's not the focus. Let's kind of put that to the back burner a little bit. He's got the thing going with Finn, obviously Kevin Owens. So what did you think of the match itself, Nick? And why do you think they decided to go this direction with Braun?
Well, it's no secret that they're really pushing Braun as that next top guy in the company. But, I have this feeling that, from everything that we've read and everything that we're sort of been predicting over the past couple of weeks, the match at SummerSlam is very likely going to be Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar yet again.
Yeah.
But I wonder if WWE is really starting to get the picture here, that maybe fans don't want to see this. Maybe fans, as much as fans are probably ready to see Brock Lesnar drop the Universal title, they don't want to see Roman Reigns win the title.
Right.
So maybe this was the way for WWE to sort of have a plan B, which is that, and I'm still predicting, I'm going to say right now, here we are, we're right after Money in the Bank. Braun Strowman just won. We don't know when he's going to cash in Money in the Bank. But I'm going to predict that the man who beats Brock Lesnar for the Universal title will be Roman Reigns. Now, if WWE is not happy with the response that he gets, not necessarily even to the title win, but maybe to the run that he has following the title win. Let's say, he gets that big title win at SummerSlam. He gets a terrible reaction, comes out on Raw the next night, and then the subsequent weeks, maybe even after his first title defense at the next pay-per-view in September, he's still being booed. Fans are not receiving it well. They've got Braun Strowman there that they can pull the trigger on.
Sure.
And it could even be a case where they know it's not going to work with Roman Reigns. So to make the fans happy, you could see a very similar thing that we've seen in the past where Roman Reigns is the guy that beats Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam so that they can always say, WWE can always say that Roman Reigns, the big dog, was the guy that conquered the beast and won the title. But then they could pull the trigger on that Money in the Bank cash in that night to end up giving the fans ultimately what they want. So what do you make of WWE potentially killing two birds with one stone there, giving Roman Reigns the win and giving him that accolade over Brock Lesnar, but ultimately giving the title to the fan favorite, who is Braun Strowman?
Maybe it plays out that way. I'm in total agreement with you, though, that Roman's going to beat Brock. But here's the problem, and I feel like this is another big topic to eventually get into. Maybe we come back to Roman Reigns next week in a little more in-depth conversation about it. But Nick, unfortunately, they have created, and they do this a lot, and they don't know how to deal with it for some reason, but they have created a situation with Roman Reigns where it does not matter what happens at this point. The fans are going to crap on it every single week. Which begs the question now, especially with Braun Strowman, who is over like $1 million with the crowd. When or do they turn Roman Reigns heel? Completely. He's got to change. No more of this in-between bullshit and having it both ways. It's got to go 90-0. Instead of just 75% of the crowd booing him at the top of their lungs, let's give the other 25% the reason to hate him too, and let them join in the chorus of boos and make him an uber superstar, but as a heel, because it makes no sense. Then it doesn't matter how loud it gets. Then you don't need to have announcers talking about it's the crowd's fault, basically, because of where they are or who they are or whatever. Rather, they can talk about the fact that we've never seen someone so hated by the fans as we have Roman Reigns. Whatever they want to say at that point, they never made that switch. They never had their Hulk Hogan moment with someone like John Cena. Roman Reigns wasn't a big enough babyface for them to have that moment. But he's damn sure a big enough star at this point, Nick. He gets a reaction that they could absolutely decide to do something with him and let him go all in on a character that I think, A, the fans are already ready for. They're sitting back waiting for this to happen. And B, I think Roman could pull it off quite well. His reactions right now have to be so reactionary to the crowd that it really gets in his head and just makes the entire thing uncomfortable. Which, Nick, I don't think that's, when he's in the ring for promos or whatever, like, it makes the entire thing uncomfortable, Nick, which is not the type of setting you want to be creating for someone like Roman Reigns. You want him confident in his promos. You want him confident with his reactions to the crowd, rather than having to walk a line of, do I act like a bad guy here? Do I keep my persona up as a good guy? They've got to go all in somehow. And it is very clear that going all in on him being a babyface, no matter who they put him up against, from a Jinder Mahal to Brock Lesnar, who's not even there. And I promise you, the fans may boo him when they're talking about Brock Lesnar on his own. When Kurt's in the ring by himself talking about Brock Lesnar, they're going to boo him because they want their champion there, and he hasn't been. But as soon as Brock is back, and as soon as he's across the ring, Roman Reigns, Brock Lesnar is a babyface again, right there on the spot. And that's an issue. And I'm tired of people justifying the fact that you don't have to have defined, definitive heels and baby faces any longer. It's a new day. Sure. But it certainly can complicate things if it's not done well. And it's not like Roman Reigns is half the time getting a huge babyface pop and the other half he's getting a huge heel reaction. This is almost Cena times 2, like to me, and at least sometimes, because they've done this it's like they've been here before. So they're extra pissed off about it. The fans are extra mad. And so to me, Nick, they've got to make the decision to turn him heel. It is causing too many complications, too many screw-ups with his own gimmick and his own character, and I just don't understand why they won't pull that trigger.
It's interesting, and I don't know how much credence I give to Roman Reigns. How do you react to Roman Reigns doing interviews? He's said this now a few times, that he is a heel.
Well, I mean, kind of.
The fans boo him. So in his mind, I mean, maybe he doesn't really feel this way. This is just the convenient excuse he's using.
Sure.
Or maybe the convenient excuse WWE is feeding for him. But he's claiming and reiterating, I am a heel because the fans boo me. I go out there and I do what I do, and if the fans boo me, then I'm a heel. Personally, I don't buy it, but I don't know what you think about that.
No, and I don't buy it either. I do think it's a convenient excuse. I think it's him trying just to make it, hey, I'm already a heel. Why do I need to turn, and do something any differently because I'm already getting booed? Well, yeah, but you still try to fog it all with acting like a baby face, and that, to me, that hurts the heels that he's actually going up against. A guy like Jinder Mahal doesn't benefit when Roman Reigns is getting booed louder than he is. There's so many complications to me and obstacles to overcome when you have a setting like this, a situation like this where your top baby face, at least in Vince's eyes and everybody else's eyes as far as how they wish it could be, is getting booed louder than any of your top heels. Like, that's not right. And it makes, hey, if you want to make him a bona fide superstar, make him a bona fide superstar. Allow him to put over other babyface, because then you can actually create what you're trying to create with Roman. If Roman is your top heel and he's the champion, then someone like Braun becomes even a bigger babyface when they beat him. Quit trying to toe the road, though, with a road that we've already gone down with John Cena and now Roman Reigns. This is getting old, and the fact that they think there is a justification for leaving him in this in-between state, for allowing him to play bad guy 10% of the time, while being booed like a bad guy 95% of the time, it just does not make any sense. There is no justification for it. Merch sales, pay-per-view buys, none of it can excuse it any longer. And it does not help your product. It hurts it. If it does anything, maybe it's indifferent. You can argue it's indifferent. It doesn't mean anything. I would try to make a case that it hurts your product more than it helps at this point. And yes, it definitely, there's a defiance that we haven't seen since John Cena. And people are so fed up with it, Nick, that they've got to make a decision to do it. As far as Braun is concerned, though, obviously, as we get into Braun.
But do you think then that Braun Strowman, do you think WWE is realizing that? Because, I don't know to what extent Roman Reigns is saying, when he does public interviews, I don't know to what extent he's being told perhaps to say certain things, or that's genuinely his feeling on the situation. Certainly he's not going to come out in a public interview and admit, yeah, well, it's not working. I'm not doing my job properly.
Right.
He's not going to say that.
No.
I think he's going to come out and still maintain, hey, I do my thing. And, if people boo me, then I'm a heel. I don't buy it. But maybe WWE, is starting to doubt this position that they're in right now.
How could you not?
And maybe, because didn't we say this before Money in the Bank? I said, I think my pick was Kevin Owens. Yep. I said I would love to have seen a Finn Balor. I remember saying specifically, Braun Strowman doesn't need Money in the Bank. Braun Strowman's won every big match so far this year, the big Royal Rumble, he doesn't need a Money in the Bank briefcase. But maybe WWE is giving it to him because they're finally thinking the Roman Reigns experiment is not working.
Right.
And maybe the idea here is we're going to have, Reigns Lesnar, because that will still be, a draw at a pay-per-view like a SummerSlam. But then we do the surprise cash-in, and we have Strowman end up leaving. He doesn't go into SummerSlam in that match. It's Reigns versus Lesnar, but he leaves SummerSlam with the title. Maybe that is a fail-safe that they're finally going to execute.
Well, I think that if they already feel, I don't know that what's going to happen in between now and then, or in that match, it's going to make them decide let's pull the plug and go with Braun instead. I think they already know how they want to play this out. I think Braun is a guy, though. Again, this is kind of a unique situation because a lot of times Money in the Bank, much in the same way that Alexa had, it goes to a heel because it's easier for them to come in and kind of get one over on the baby face that wins, and a lot of times you want your champion as a heel so the baby face can chase it. To me, this is a unique situation because when Roman wins the title, then what happens with Braun? Yes, down the road, I don't think it happens at SummerSlam. They're going at this point. They've invested way too much time, energy, and money into Roman Reigns. They're going to give him the title run. I'm just curious to whether or not he actually has the title for a while. Or not. I think that they have to at this point. I just hope they go and turn him heel completely. No questions, no in between, no debate on what he is. Let him go there all the way. And then obviously Braun they can use at any point. And I think Monday's follow-up, again, kind of to me, Nick, made it seem like they do have their mind made up on what they're doing. Roman versus Brock will be the focus most likely, whereas Braun Strowman is going to end up kind of being shielded a little bit from that program and come and work some other things, maybe with Kevin Owens, whatever they're going to do a little bit with Finn Balor. It seems like they want to kind of distance him a little bit from that. So they can put the focus on Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. Regardless of what you think about it, it certainly appears like that's going to happen. Before we wrap up, though, Nick, obviously, a couple other things to run down. As far as Money in the Bank goes, AJ Styles does end up retaining over Nakamura. Is this the end of that feud in your mind, Nick, or is it going to continue? And what did you think overall about the match?
Sorry, the match, the Reigns.
No, Styles and Nakamura.
Cut out there. Oh, Styles Nakamura.
Styles and Nakamura. Styles, obviously. Do you think this feud is over for now, or do you feel like it continues? And what did you think of the match?
It's very interesting, and I think it might be over. I thought the match was phenomenal.
It was great.
Match of the night, as far as I'm concerned. It is hard to sort of compare to certain things like the Money in the Bank matches, but as far as pure, the singles matches go, pure in-ring singles match, I'd give it to Styles Nakamura. Great match. But, on SmackDown now, we're seeing this gauntlet match that's taking place, and Shinsuke Nakamura is not one of the competitors. So unless something happens between now and Extreme Rules where, Nakamura works his way back into that match, I don't know what's going on here. And I really also don't know how Nakamura could make a case for another title shot.
Yeah.
He's done. He's been beaten so many times. I don't really see how this could continue. And I was surprised. I thought, and I had predicted AJ Styles was going to retain, but I thought that the feud was going to continue on, possibly seeing that real culmination, at SummerSlam. And it could still happen. But I'm not really getting that impression. But overall, a great match. Will be very interesting to see what happens with him because I want to see the feud continue. I really think that Nakamura deserves a title run. And I have a fear that if he doesn't get it soon enough, he's not going to get it in WWE. He had not been handled very well going into this feud with AJ Styles. A lot of people feel that his push and debut on the main roster has failed and was not as successful as it was in NXT. And I have a bad feeling that if they don't give him a title run soon, potentially at the next pay-per-view or at SummerSlam, that it might not come for him in WWE.
Yeah, I can see where you would say that. And I think that I kind of put his WWE career, not NXT, but WWE, up on the main stage in kind of two blocks before he turned heel and after. And I feel like they are buying into him as a heel, and I'm buying into him as a heel. I think his demeanor, everything about him as a heel is absolutely spot on, and I think he's really good in that role. So I would like to see them continue this, and I'm with you though. It does need to happen now if it's going to happen. But I'm curious to whether Samoa Joe, who's also a heel, is he that next fit? Because I mean, Nakamura. Then what's after that, I guess, would be the question. Daniel Bryan, potentially. It's like there's a couple of ways they could go with this. If AJ Styles remains the champion, then it seems like maybe Samoa Joe could be the next likely candidate for a feud, and then obviously maybe a title run. If they're wanting Daniel Bryan in the picture at some point soon, then I think Nakamura would make sense, or Samoa Joe. But I think Nakamura has to get it now, or I'm with you, it could, without a question, be a while if it ever happens for Nakamura. Could he go the way of an Asuka, for example, who they had big high hopes for, yet obviously now I don't know. I mean, she just lost obviously on Sunday too. So I'm really curious to what they're going to do, and if this feud is over, it does seem like it should be, but I don't know. I mean, SmackDown and their championship picture, Nick, is kind of is the one that certainly feels to be up in the air. Real quick though, before we wrap up, the 4-hour format co-branded now, Nick. Did you like it overall? Money in the Bank. I mean, was it good for you? And was it too long? Because it still felt draggish, man. 4 hours is tough.
It did, and the issue is going to be that I don't think a pay-per-view like Money in the Bank is a good testament to how the 4-hour co-branded pay-per-view will be from here on out. Because you had those big gimmick matches with the Money in the Bank.
I think it's going to be worse with the non-big pay-per-views.
Cash in, you had the Last Man Standing. Now, perhaps a pay-per-view like an Extreme Rules, or even when we get to, and that's itself a gimmick pay-per-view as well. Once we get into the non-gimmick pay-per-views, the backlashes and the, those kinds of events.
Mm-hmm. It's going to get bad. It's going to get hard to watch.
It could be, we could really be feeling draggy pay-per-views here.
Yeah.
I think Money in the Bank is just one of those spectacle pay-per-views. You could have a pay-per-view like a Hell in a Cell. That could be another spectacle pay-per-view that might be better served for the 4 hours. But those non-gimmick pay-per-views, I don't know. Because, like you said, even Money in the Bank felt pretty long to me.
Yeah.
So and with a stacked pay-per-view like that,
right,
it will be interesting to see how some of those quote-unquote B-level pay-per-views perform at 4 hours with the co-branded theme.
I want to give a quick shout-out, though, Nick. You and I didn't know where this was going to go before we wrap up, before we get out of here officially. Man, the B team, I don't have a lot of high hopes for it, but their segment on Raw, I've got to give them a shout-out because that was brilliant. I loved it.
Listen, if they don't have a future as a WWE tag team, they could go around the world working comedy clubs as impersonators.
Man.
I mean, okay, Bo Dallas has an advantage because he's actually
Bray Wyatt's brother, right.
So him sounding like Bray Wyatt may not be much of a stretch, but he still did one hell of an impression of the Bray Wyatt character. And Curtis Axel did a fantastic job as Matt Hardy. I'll tell you what, these guys consistently impress. They're great. I've been really enjoying them. And, and a lot of guys will always talk about what a great talent Curtis Axel really is. And it's really fantastic to see him getting his due right now because that was one hell of a segment last night. I was really impressed by those impersonations.
I agree. I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of how they continue building up walking the line of a credible threat to the tag team championships, but also doing what they are getting over for, which is the comedy It's really a fine line to walk, but they're doing it beautifully so far. I mean, people are wanting to they're building this up the right way. Hopefully they don't rush it. They still need time. Keep in mind, these guys never won anything before the past couple of months. They've got to give this a little bit more time to simmer. But I'm looking forward to it just because I'm looking forward to the build-up anyway. I don't know how much I'm going to look forward to the match and any title changes or any of that right now, but I am looking forward to kind of how they continue going as, at least just from an entertainment standpoint. It was actually really, really, really good this week, and I think it's getting a little bit more enjoyable to watch as we go. Man, what a week, though. And SmackDown hasn't even aired as we record this today. We will be back next week, though, to continue following up with some of the fallout of Money in the Bank and the directions they're wanting to go in. I think SmackDown this week will clearly be a good indicator of what direction they're going to take going forward.
Sure, for Extreme Rules as well. Potentially that title match at Extreme Rules. And then we can talk a little bit more about Extreme Rules in general.
No kidding.
With this big multi-man match that's taking place on Raw. They're really getting a big head start on announcing big matches for Extreme Rules, which is still a month away. So we should have a lot to talk about on the Extreme Rules front next week on the show.
The Voice of Wrestling right here on voiceofwrestling.net. Check out prowrestling.com as well, where Nick is the senior editor there. All your news, and of course, Fight TV airs every Wednesday. We air there every Wednesday at 5 Eastern. So make sure you check it out and download their app. That's FITE, fight.tv. For Nick Paglino, I am Chris Cash. This is the Voice of Wrestling. We'll see you next week.